Hello, you're very welcome to another session in our series focused on VMware's hybrid cloud solutions. So in today's session, we're going to look at VMware Cloud or VMC on AWS. We'll talk a little bit about what's driving customers to use the platform today before digging a little deeper and looking at the technologies that actually underpin the solution. We'll look at your deployment options as a customer and what options are available to you, everything from running a POC straight through to full-on production. We'll look at the subscription model and what the impact is there in terms of payment options. And we'll also talk about, integrating the platform with your existing VMware-based solutions and how you can migrate workloads to and from the SDDC in the cloud. Ryan, thank you very much for joining us. Would you mind giving us a quick introduction and maybe telling me a little bit about your role within VMware?
Yes, thanks, Porrick. So I'm Ryan Sudding. I've been working with VMware for the last 8 years, and I work as a solutions engineer, and I've been focused on the Irish market. So I tend to work with finance, central government, retail, and other large organizations within the country.
Why do you think VMware decided to partner with Amazon to deliver their software solution or their SDDC in the Amazon public cloud?
Yeah, so I think one of the core drivers of that is VMware is the largest owner of the data center space, and AWS is the largest IaaS provider. And taking those two joint powerhouses together and building a common platform, I think was a big driver. AWS have a massive footprint across the globe, and VMware wants to be able to bring that service to all their customers globally. So I think that was a key driver for that partnership. I think globally what we've seen, the biggest use case we've seen is data center consolidation. So organizations have multiple data centers and either have come to a point where they need to refresh that data center, as in refresh that contract, or they feel that they don't want to be owning data centers anymore. So we've seen data center consolidation as one of the biggest drivers globally for the consumption of VMware Cloud and AWS. The other area that we've seen, particularly within the Irish context, is data center extension. So this is the ability for the business to say yes more often. So the business has requirements, they don't have enough capacity on-prem, but their ability to be able to expand that footprint into a public cloud without having to refactor or change how they deliver that service. They can consume that workload in VMware Cloud and AWS, and if they procure their hardware back on-prem, they can bring it back on-prem. Another use case that's been very predominant is DR as a service. So the ability for organizations to maybe shut down one of their own data centers that they've had in the past, which typically has just been used for a DR use case. So shutting that down, again, saving costs there, but that ability to then use VMware Cloud and AWS and only consume the infrastructure that they need as and when they need to do testing or when they actually need to initiate a true failover.
So I'm interested in understanding what exactly makes up the solution in the Amazon cloud. So what is supporting the VMware software stack under the covers?
Yeah, so firstly, the service is built on AWS bare metal. So we build the service on top of AWS metal that's been co-engineered with VMware and AWS to deliver the best experience for that software-defined data center. So when VMware talk about a software-defined data center, we talk about three core constructs, right? We talk about compute, network, and storage. So vSphere, NSX, and vSAN, these three components are wrapped in lifecycle management and are delivered as a service for our customers. So the customer can click a button and get vSphere, NSX, and vSAN delivered as a service for their customers. The consumption point for that service is vCenter. So again, for administrators that are looking to consume this, they're very familiar with that tooling because it's exactly the same way they consume that service in an on-prem context. Yeah, so we talk about the customer's data center. So we take the consumption point of that compute, network, and storage being vCenter in your private cloud. And then we can link that private cloud with the public cloud. So in this context, we have compute, network, and storage in VMware Cloud and AWS, and we can link those two together. So we have this context called Hybrid Cloud Connect, and what that allows us to do is to consume that vCenter in AWS from the same pane of glass as what we have in the on-prem world. So our vCenter in our private cloud can see that vCenter in VMware Cloud and AWS, and therefore provide a consistent way of operating and consuming the services. We have that infrastructure deployed across 17 regions globally. And that also then gives us a tie-in into AWS services. So a lot of customers would start their journey consuming VMware Cloud and AWS, and will start leveraging services like EC2, or they would use S3 buckets or database services to work on the use case that they might have in mind when moving to VMware Cloud and AWS. So when we deploy this service, you will deploy it in your own VPC that you will have to get assigned to your account. But once you have that SDDC assigned, we have a direct connection into those services. So there is no ingress or egress charges to that service. So if you decide you want to move your application into VMware Cloud and AWS as an example, and you say, well, I want to leverage data services in AWS, then I can leverage Redis or RDS as a service, and my application can consume those, but there are no costs from a network perspective between my SDDC in the cloud and the native AWS services.
So if I do deploy an SDDC in AWS and I want to hook that up to my on-premise VMware infrastructure, how do I go about doing that?
So we have two ways that customers would typically connect to that SDDC. One would be over VPN, and this we would see commonly used for POC scenarios, or proof of concepts. But typically, once a customer goes into some form of production with this service, they would use direct connect services from AWS. So they would typically use their network provider of choice, and a direct connect would be overlaid on top of that service. So therefore, again, that SDDC from a network perspective would just be seen as another endpoint from a network perspective, and from a VMware perspective would just be seen as another data center.
And what do I need on-prem? Do I need to have certain versions? Do I need to have a full SDDC deployed? Is there a minimum that I need to have in order to make that connection capable?
Yeah, so from an on-prem perspective, our only ask is that you're running vSphere. So we can support customers as far back as 5.5. So we have that ability for customers who have unsupported vSphere environments. We can connect them up, and we can help customers get off those platforms onto supported platforms like the VMware SDDC. If you want that hybrid link connection, then your vCenter needs to be at least at vCenter 6 update 3.
Okay, so if I've hooked up my on-prem to my SDDC and I now want to start consuming resources, or probably more so I want to migrate existing workloads from my on-prem into the new SDDC we've just deployed, how do I go about doing that, and what tooling is available to me to allow that happen?
Yeah, so one of the services that is part of the SDDC, so when you stand up an SDDC, you get compute, network, storage, and vCenter. There's another technology called Hybrid Cloud Connect, and that's a core part of the service that's included. So that will be instantiated by default on the cloud side. We will ask customers to deploy an appliance on their side, or with the support of customer success, or through a partner. And what we will do then is we will establish a connection between the on-prem vCenter and your SDDC. So there's a couple of ways that you can get workloads up there. The first one would be, which is a typical use case, is we would provide layer 2 connectivity between the on-prem environment and the SDDC, so we can provide a layer 2 extension. This allows you to do things like vMotion a workload from your on-prem into the public cloud without any downtime. We also have a vSphere replicated assisted mode, so the workload will be replicated across, and then there will be a process of replicating the last bits across, and then we'll vMotion that workload across. So that will be a more efficient way of doing a vMotion. For customers that are looking to do more of a bulk migration, where they want to evacuate a network segment or a data center, we also have this concept of bulk migration, and that allows an organization to take, lift and shift that workload, shift it up to the cloud, make sure that all the data is replicated across, and basically cut off the network on-prem and start that workload in the public cloud. So we have multiple ways to support customers, but it is by far the quickest and easiest way for customers to get access to any public cloud resources is leveraging HCX technology.
And HCX, as you mentioned, that's available as part of the solution, so it's free essentially.
Correct. There's no cost to the customer at all.
Okay, and from an orchestration point of view, if I don't do the layer 2 extensibility, can I still fail over but orchestrate that failover? So say re-IP the machine or whatever else?
Correct. So the bulk migration will facilitate that. So the bulk migration, you can plan your migration using bulk migration. Says, I'm going to start moving these workloads across. You can time them, you can schedule them, you can bring them up on the other side. So you can use bulk migration to perform that orchestrated process. Some customers would leverage our SRM as a service capability as well. That's an add-on. Now that's another technology that you could use to orchestrate workloads into the public cloud. But typically bulk migration is the more common tooling that gets used for that. Yes, so we have two DR capabilities or two DR offerings. One is SRM as a service. The other one that we have is our traditional DR as a service capability. And this allows you to be able to take your workloads, replicate them from your on-prem environment, and they will get seeded into a data lake on the back end or a data store on the back end. They won't be live at that point in time. And you can then stand up an SDDC if you want to. So if you wanted to recover those workloads, then you could stand up an SDDC, and part of that service will be to take those DR backups or those DR targets and recover them onto the SDDC. So this allows you to be able to place your workloads in a DR site, but in an offline state. So that reduces the cost for our customers. Obviously, for SRM, you would need those workloads to be online. So that is some of the subtle differences between the two offerings. The one provides a lower entry point for customers, but also a longer time to recover because the workload is offline for that period of time.
Can you talk to me a little bit about my options when I go to deploy an SDDC?
So today, if a customer is looking for an SDDC where they expect that SDDC to expand and contract, we still recommend a 3-node cluster as the starting point. But we have also introduced a 2-node configuration. That is really good for customers who want a lower entry point into that service, but also for customers who don't need that expandable infrastructure, because that 2-node configuration is static, it can't expand. So if a customer wanted to go from 2-node to 3-node, they'd have to deploy a 3-node, migrate the workload, and destroy the 2-node. So that is the caveat of a 2-node, but the entry point is lower. Also, for customers who are starting on this journey, we do offer a 1-node configuration for 30 days. There is no SLA on that 1-node, but it does give a customer the ability to get their hands dirty, get the VPN stood up without having to consume a large 3-node configuration at that point in time. Yeah, so one of the first things that VMware take ownership of is so all those components of the SDDC, so vSphere, NSX, vSAN, and vCenter. If you're using SRM or HCX, all those are patched, secured, and managed by VMware. So the customer does not have to worry about the security of those technologies. That responsibility is owned by VMware. Obviously, all the workloads that the customer runs on top of those machines, the network policies, the storage policies, the compute policies, those are owned by the customer. So it is a shared responsibility, just as any other public cloud provider has. We maintain ISO standards, so we have ISO standards like 27001. In most of the regions, as an example, we offer security standards like PCI. So we have white papers that cover that shared security model, and also to give you an idea around all the other certifications that we have as an organization. Security has become really, really important for organizations. So the patching and the management of that technology stack is front and center for many IT organizations, and is quite a pain for a lot of IT organizations. If you take the example of the Spectre meltdown incident that happened a number of years ago, IT organizations were in a spin trying to find resolutions to that and get the time to get their systems patched and up to date. I mean, one of the value prompts of this proposition is that by the time that incident or vulnerability was launched in the public, VMware have already patched and secured the VMware and AWS offering. So customers were already protected from the day that that incident was made public. So that's an example of the value that it brings. Yeah, so we have two core models. So one which is based on an on-demand offering. So as an example, we have one customer who is in manufacturing. They use the platform for training. So they would use infrastructure as code to spin up an SDDC for a day or two. They would offer that training to their staff in that relevant region, and then they would break it down again. So for them, an on-demand model makes a lot of sense in those particular use cases. But for most customers that are looking to run more static workloads in that public cloud, we would offer the example of reserved instances of 1 year or 3 years. So a customer would pay up front for 1 or 3 years. And then they can also, if they reserve X amount of nodes for 1 or 3 years, they can still use on demand if they want to scale in and out based on their needs.
Okay, would you have any examples of any case studies or customer stories even where a customer is engaged with VMC on AWS and some of the values that they realized from doing so?
Yes. So one example that I can bring is Stagecoach. So they work as a subcontractor for Transport of London. They had a challenge where their core critical application was not providing the operational uptime that they needed as an organization. It was an old legacy application. And because of the state of that application, trying to modernize that and refactor that was not something that was going to be an easy task. So for them, the easiest thing for them to do was to try and find a platform that was going to give that product or that service more uptime. So they engaged with our sales team and our technical team. We did some technical validation with them, and they made a decision that they're going to put that application on top of an AWS, a VMware Cloud and AWS platform that is a stretch cluster. So that stretch cluster gave them the ability to increase their uptime. Now, a couple of the incredible aspects to this story is their uptime on their current platform before they moved into VMware Cloud and AWS was 98%. So that was the SLA that was their KPI that they were that they weren't meeting at the time. So they've had that application up in the cloud now for over 2 years, and their uptime is now 5.9. So they've been able to achieve 5.9 since that. Even though the SLA from VMware is only 4 nines, they've been able to achieve 5 nines. The other part of that story, which I think is incredible, is that they had signed that contract with VMware, the customer, and they did that on a Friday. They were able to get that application into production, into VMware Cloud and AWS in 3 weeks. So from the time they signed, 3 weeks later, that the application not just tested up in AWS, but in production. And that just shows you the sheer power of the platform, the speed at which customers can consume public cloud. And that gave them the ability to be able to drive improve the uptime of that application. The other value adds that platform brought to them is that they were using Veeam as a backup technology. So they'd asked the question, how would they run that as a service? So obviously trying to run those backups and feed them back on-prem was going to be cost prohibitive. So what they did is they used EC2 to stand up Veeam inside the cloud. They used S3 buckets to store those backups. So again, those are massive cost savings for them to be able to offer a proper end-to-end service.
Are you able to tell me anything about future development plans for the platform itself? You able to give us any secrets?
Yeah, so we are working with Amazon to integrate the VMware service back into the native AWS console, and therefore just treating that as another service within that layer, within that fabric. So that's a piece we're working on. Customers, as we've spoken about in the past, DR is becoming a big use case for customers, and really the goal there is to provide more burst assurance. So when customers decide they want to use VMware Cloud and AWS as a target, then giving them the assurance that there will be capacity if they do decide to push the right button is a key factor for a lot of organizations. So burst assurance is another area that we're focused on for customers. So those are some of the new services that we're looking to deliver for our customers as a joint offering.
So if I'm watching this video and I want to find out more, what would you recommend is my next step in the process?
We are heavily driven by the partner organization. And so we would always ask that you go and speak to a VMware partner. Yeah, so another area is customers often struggle with understanding the value of moving a workload or an application or closing a data center and moving it into a service like VMware Cloud and AWS. And one of the things that VMware and its partners can do is run an assessment. So we have a lot of really smart tooling that is very light touch that can assess your current estate today, and we can use that metadata and information to model the particular use case that you have in mind for the public cloud. So we can use this tooling, run an assessment, and help you understand how you will go about using that service, the cost of running that service, and any other consulting services that you may or may not need around that.
Brian, that was very insightful and helpful. Thank you very much for your time. Until we meet again. Thank you.
Thanks, Porrick.